discuss or cover the Harris-Tadero model of rural to urban migration. First of all, for some background, and this is more recent than some of the economics background we've been covering. Kenya, late 1960s, following its independence. There was high unemployment in Nairobi and other urban centers. There was an agreement in place between the public and private sectors and the unions to increase job opportunities in the cities. The unions would hold on wage demands. The idea was that the creation of many new urban jobs would reduce unemployment. The result was that urban unemployment, in fact, increased. Why? So, enter two associate economics professors from MIT. They were contracted or brought in by the Rockefeller Foundation, which certainly has sponsored many development projects in Africa over the past decades. They were brought in to resolve this paradox. Professor John R. Harris, seen here. Photo absent for Professor Michael P. Tadero. Today, Professor Harris is still with Boston University, and Michael P. Tadero of late was with New York University. At that time, in Africa or other less developed countries, there was only considered to be two labor sectors, urban and rural. And some quick definitions: the urban or formal sector, as they called it also in economics books, are jobs with relatively high wages, tenure, pension schemes, and that would apply, for example, to government employees, owners and employees in large firms, etc. And the second sector, the rural or agricultural sector, included those working in the farms, the fields, herding, grazing, fishing, mining, etc. Initially, Harris and Tadero, they looked at the two-sector model with the classic model with flexible wages, the labor market model with flexible wages. This is the outline of a model or the graph. I'll just explain. First of all, it's a double y-axis graph. Urban wages on the left, rural wages on the right. The x-axis, horizontal, is the total labor force for the given country, region, or demographic that we're talking about. Starting from the left to the right is an increase in the urban labor employed, and likewise, from the right to the left is the rural labor employed. Next. Impose on top of that a urban wage demand curve, and of course, from the left-hand side, that's a negative slope curve. There's an inverse correlation between the number of people ultimately hired in the urban sector and the wages being paid or demanded. Next. Equally, a rural wage curve, line CD, again negatively sloped from the right-hand side, the same inverse correlation. More people engaged, more supply and demand of laborers, it depresses the wages. At some point there will be equilibrium, where there is at some point there's equilibrium in the competitive two-sector labor market, identified by the red lines, where the urban and rural wage are equal, WU equals WR, and there is full employment at L asterisk, the balance between urban and rural workers, and there's no further migration going from right to left. Next. Harris and Tadero noticed that with that basic model, there was limitations to it. Real wages, adjusted for cost of living differential, were higher in the urban or formal sectors than rural, due to unions, collective bargaining, minimum wage floors, etc. Formal wages are considered sticky or less variable, thereby creating a wage floor. Formal wages are not flexible enough to serve as a clearing for the urban labor supply. And to be hired in the urban or formal sector, you got to get there, you got to be there. So it's personal volition to move in from the rural areas. Hence, there's more rural areas searching for formal sector jobs that are hired. They have moved into the cities on the expectation of being hired. Those not hired remain unemployed or informally employed in the urban area. As part of this model, rural wages are considered to remain flexible, responding to supply and demand, and there is no rural unemployment. Next. So what they did is Harrison Tadero, they expanded the two model to a three-sector labor wage model. Here you can see between the urban labor force and the rural labor force, they have now accounted for the informal sector of laborers to include the urban unemployed. So that the portion of labor force, or the labor pool available in the urban area, consists of those formally employed and those in the informal component. So once again, in order to equalize so by introducing the informal labor LI and the expected wage MI, wages are again equalized between urban and rural. There's a new relationship that accounts for that. The proportion of people, or the probability of landing a job in the formal sector, plus the probability or chance of landing a job in the informal sector, equals the rural wage. So by equalizing wages, if the left-hand side, or the total sum of the urban wage, or expected urban wage, is greater than the rural wage, there'll be migration to the urban area. However, if that relationship proves to be less than the expected or paid rural wage, there will be immigration or reverse immigration to the rural area. Next. Just a bit more about the informal sector. That includes the failed aspirants to the formal, largely, or includes many failed aspirants to the formal sector jobs. Many of these migrants end up in dead-end service sector jobs, i.e. street vendors, the car washers, the cleaners, the taco stand operators, errand runners, etc. The World Bank considers the informal sector, or the services sector, as, quote, a reflection of the inability of industry in developing countries to keep up with the pace of rural to urban migration. And of course, overcrowding or urban migration brings with it overcrowding and social problems. And the shots are just pulled down from the internet because two of them you'll see in the next three and a half weeks, firsthand, the urban slums of Rio and a sprawl of urban slums in Sao Paulo. That includes many workers in this, or many of the folks in this informal sector. And this is an example of one barrio on the southeast side of Mexico City. So back to Kenya, closing this piece off, Harris Tadero research informed the government that the solution to urban unemployment was not to create more urban jobs. Hence the paradox is that the more jobs you create in urban centers, the higher the unemployment rate. So a policy of rural development was required, and it was put in place for Kenya to increase the rural sector wage. The result was that unemployment dropped in the urban centers. Next. So leaving on this point a little bit of a segue, or bringing it to the present day, while most Harris Tadero work focused on Africa and other less developed countries, the basic relationship or formula has been stylized by these econometricians and governments, the social development arms of governments, in the more developed countries and regions to examine migration trends. And Harris Tadero relationships have been involved in examining migration across the EU, across the United States of America, and in Canada. And that's where Amber's going to pick up.
Cool.